Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm really excited because we have something a little bit different today. This is footage from a panel that I did at PAX South. It was the first time that I brought my Wholesome Cozy Games panel to a PAX event, and it was really exciting. And thanks to Sam from Whitethorn Digital, also known as BU on Mixer, I have video footage of that panel. And so while the audio, I'm not great at taking audio from the room and putting it and editing it for video purposes here. It's a little bit rough. I really wanted to showcase this because it's a really great opportunity for folks who weren't able to go to PAX South or aren't able to go to events to see what panels are like and see what we talked about. So this panel was called A Case for Cozy, Why We Need Wholesome Games. And this is a panel that's been on my mind for quite some time, and only recently have I proposed it to places and taken it to different events. And with each panel, I've had slightly different participants each time, and that's something I hope to do in the future, just because I've noticed it changes the conversation every time. New games get recommended every time, and it's really exciting to see just what different perspectives can bring to this topic, which is really fun. So for this particular iteration of the panel, we had 4 total participants. I was the moderator, and Kels, who is the developer, one of the developers of Calico, participated. Leanne, who was at Brace Yourself Games, and Josh Boykin, who is the founder of Untitled Game, and they were participants, and they also talked about wholesome games with me during this event. As a nerdy and self-reflective aside, it's really neat to see how far the panel has come since then. We also did this panel at PAX East with a different group of folks, and if you'd like a recap, there's actually an episode of IntelliGame, a podcast that Josh Boykin runs, that we recap the panel in that episode, and the link I'll put below. Unfortunately, that panel recording did not make it out of Boston. It did not survive the trip, so we don't have a recording of that particular event, but just from a personal standpoint, a reflective standpoint, it was really cool to see how, selfishly, I feel like my skills speaking at the moderating seat improved. I like to think that they did. But also just how neat it was to, again, like I said earlier, have different people come in and say what they thought about indie games and wholesome games and what their role is in this industry, and why we think it's so important that we not only have these games, but we celebrate them and embrace the fact that if we like these kind of games, it's okay. They're still games, and they're still wonderful, and you're wonderful. Okay, so that being said, this is my intro to the panel because the video doesn't start till after I've introduced myself, but y'all know me, so that's okay. And yeah, so let's just jump into it. And again, sorry for the wonky audio and not ideal video footage, but it's the best I could do, so I hope you still enjoy it. All right, there we go.
We're showing in the PAX Together booth down in the Expo Hall. And I guess you can see just a lot of it, and we need cute and cozy. That's our goal. So on brand.
Hi, I'm Leanne. I'm the senior community developer over at Brace Yourself Games. We make Crypt of the Necrodancer, Cadence of Hyrule, that kind of fun stuff. We're not really showing anything here. It's just me doing panels and talking to people.
Hi, I'm Josh. I run IntelliGame, a game culture criticism site where we find intersections between games and the world around us. I'm also helping show Garden Story for Rose City Games down in the PAX Together booth. If you're looking for a cozy game, it's a good one.
Thank you for doing my shameless self-plug for me. So first off, I wanted to set the stage and ask everyone kind of what do you feel makes a game cozy? So thinking about things like visuals, sound, music, mechanics, or any sort of like special X factors that really make you, when you see a game, think this is a game that is wholesome and maybe one I want to jump into.
Well, I think a first interesting thing is the difference between wholesome and cozy. I think something can be wholesome without being cozy, but it can't really be cozy without being wholesome. Because, and this is a lot of the stuff we look at with Calico, it's not just about having aesthetics be really cute, It's about actually making the player be de-stressed, having things like not things that punish the player too much, and not things that make the player feel bad, because that wouldn't be cozy. And especially when you get like further into design, it can be anything about like, this color is too bright and it'll hurt your head, or this sound blares. You've all played games where you have to do something that has a sound like do 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 do, and you have to do that 50 times in a row. Not cozy. And then on the side of wholesome could be anything that just adds to your life in a positive way. It could be something that's challenging, but something that adds to the world in a positive way.
Yeah, going back to what you were saying about like sounds in games that do it. I don't know if you've been playing Pokemon Sword Shield, but the noise that a Pokemon makes when you Gigantamax it, hate it. Absolutely hate it. It's just like this massively loud screech, and it happens every time. And the volume is way off, and it just, I hate it. But what makes a game cozy for me is, I guess, kind of having like that personal feeling to it, and feeling kind of involved with it. And it's also for me a lot of art style stuff. So anything that's like not hyper realistic, yes.
I agree. Yes. I tend to find cozy. It's sometimes hard for me to identify right off the bat, but it's something that makes me feel like comforted, usually by the end of it. I think there is that idea of sometimes receiving a positive stress, but sometimes like just no stress at all. And there are some really interesting games that I think we'll be mentioning that add into that.
Yeah, I think for me, coziness is really tied to space for me, and it kind of goes into two different sort of extremes where I feel very cozy with games. Link's Awakening is one, the Switch remake, where the space that they create and the households in particular, when you go in, there are knickknacks, there are lots of little things that make it feel like home. And for me, that's what's really cozy, because it feels very intimate already, and I already feel the personality of the inhabitant. And conversely, there's a game that I'm fairly sure Josh is going to be mentioning later, but it's called Yonder, and the breadth of that game and the ability for me to explore, again, in a non-violent capacity, allows me to feel cozy, because I just feel like this sense of awe and wonder in the beauty of the world, but also there's no violence, so I don't feel like I have to walk around with a sword ready to attack anyone that stumbles upon me.
Yeah, Link's Awakening is a really good example of a game with violence that can still feel cozy because of the way that they enact it.
Yeah, I think the Zelda series, I think, uses space really well to create that sense. So what I wanted to do, because I have a habit of recommending games to a lot of people, is really quickly do game breaks where I want to recommend cozy games, because at the end, these three will have lots of games, and I didn't want to take that time. So the first quick game rep break is Weaving Tides from Follow the Feathers. They're from the EU, and they're working on a game that allows you to craft with a flying weaving dragon. It's beautiful. I highly recommend it if you're excited about crafting and cozy games. So the next questions, so I'm kind of wondering, are we seeing an uptick? I feel like we're all at this panel, so maybe we know the answer already. But are we seeing more wholesome games right now, or have they always kind of been around in the games industry?
Well, I've definitely seen an uptick in ones that are getting popular, and I think a big portion of that is how many amazing non-cozy indie games there are. I talked to a lot of friends who their preference is non-cozy indie games, and they're like, I'm sorry this game is coming out and it's amazing, but I have 50 games in my library that I'm still getting through. Someone who likes cozy games, their stance is more like, I've been waiting 2 years for Animal Crossing. It'll come out, I'll play it for 6 months. Maybe longer, much longer. And well, because they've been playing Animal Crossing for 5 years, that one game prior. New Leaf. And that issue is that there's this huge underserved market of people who are looking for wholesome games, and people who didn't look for wholesome games before that are now getting to a point in their life where they're stressed, and sometimes they want to play GTA, and sometimes they just can't kind of process that right now. And I think a lot of us can empathize with that in the year 2020. I find a lot of really amazing, dark, violent games coming out where my friends just go, I really want to play this, but I can't really process it at this point.
I think as well there's kind of a shift in what people think it's okay to like. I think maybe people would not talk so much about playing cozy and stuff and kind of favor discussing the difference and more kind of like AAA, like realistic final type things that they play because that's kind of seen as the popular thing. But I think as we're seeing a shift kind of away from that AAA spectrum and into like indie games getting a lot more popular, like you were saying, I think that balance and that shift is kind of making it more okay to be really into them and be like loud about it, which is nice.
Yeah, pardon me. I spoke a little bit about this on a prior panel, but I also think a big part of, I feel like there are more wholesome games now and more cozy games because there's a greater number of people in the development space who are able to create the games that they're passionate about. It's not that you have to get into a AAA studio, you have to learn these 3 coding languages, you have to have this gigantic team, bunches of money. There are individual people who can put together a Stardew Valley, Undertale, these games that can be really influential, and because they can do what's personally exciting to them, I think that gives more space for them to make these wholesome experiences, and then for us as players to be able to be like, oh, whoa, I didn't know you could do that with games, maybe I could do that too, and it creates that sort of snowball effect.
Yeah, to that definitely, I worked for AAA companies in the past, and it is a lot of like, the game that you make is decided by the manager. And the managers is old world game industry. and they were definitely a very specific type of identity of player, and they wanted to make the types of games that they wanted to. Even though something like Barbie's Dream House, the video game, made a gajillion dollars, the game industry doesn't actually follow the market as exactly as you'd think. They do get a lot of leeway in picking what they want to do. When there's $2 billion types of genres, they can pick one. So yeah, being able to make our own games and having a lot of kids that grew up on Nintendogs and Cooking Mama. I just went to one of the booths and got Gardening Mama. I'm excited, I'm ready.
All about that plant life.
Yeah, you actually have the ability to make it. And also even after that, when there was the indie boom, a lot of publishers don't want to invest in low-budget games, and because cozy sometimes relies on stylization and not realistic games, that means that they can be a lot lower budget, and that's kind of hard to find funding for sometimes.
Yeah. So with that, we're seeing an uptick is what I'm hearing. We're seeing more of these games populate the space. So would you consider cozy games in the mainstream at this point?
Not quite. I think we're getting there, and I think we're kind of going in that direction, and things like Stardew and Animal Crossing kind of revitalizing itself are definitely pushing towards that. But I think we've also kind of already immediately pigeonholed it by just doing the whole like have a house, grow a farm kind of thing. Like there's a lot of that, and I'm really, really happy and excited about it, but I'm also excited to see us branch out as an industry from just those kinds of things and to see what we can do in the realm of wholesome that isn't just like live in the woods, although I'm very much all for living in the woods.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't quite call it mainstream yet. I feel like we've seen AAAs do, I guess my definition of like mainstream would be, when AAA does it, like we see commercials for it, or and we've seen AAA kind of experiment with what feel like one of the more cozy aesthetics, like Unravel, but it feels like they haven't really caught fire the way that like a smash hit like Stardew Valley does. And I think that there's also that difficulty of like, there are many more cozy games out there, but I think they're still hard to find for folks who aren't super tied into the space like perhaps we might be. So I think they're growing in popularity, but I wouldn't quite call it mainstream yet.
I'd also say I think we're kind of, it's almost a gradient. We're getting into mainstream games like Stardew Valley or Celeste, which are two sides of the same coin. Of Celeste has very, very cute aesthetics, but is a very, very, very challenging game. So it still has that non-cozy factor. And with Stardew Valley, it's a very calming game, but it still has a huge challenge element to the strategies that you can do. There's hardcore min-maxing of how you play it and everything like that. So I think we still, legitimately other than Animal Crossing. Animal Crossing is the only one right now that is both cozy in both ways, without challenge, except for looming debt. Yes, that I think they might be changing for the new new game, actually. We finally realized in 2020 we can't be thinking about debt.
It's too much.
It's
We're always
really
thinking about debt.
we don't need a game for it. Want to go to an island? Not think about debt. Go to the woods. I think we still are struggling to find something that's Animal Crossing-esque in the way that it's cute and cozy and also not stressful and not challenging.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. I do love that I'm seeing the AAA space and developers incorporate more cozy elements in their game, but I do agree that it hasn't quite reached the mainstream. And sometimes I wonder too, like, a lot of the coziness for me personally comes through knowing that it's a smaller team typically who creates the game, and there's this sort of sincerity with coziness and cozy games that I wonder if how possible is it to, other than like an Animal Crossing and like those rare cases, how easy would it be even for a studio like the big studio to be able to capture something like that easily?
Yeah, I think another thing that only small studios are doing right now is really ample representation. And I think we don't talk enough about how cozy can be when you don't see yourself in a game, it's alienating. And alienating isn't cozy. And finally, as much as we bring up Animal Crossing, finally in 2020, they're bringing in representation and your main character, but it's actually still not other than your main character, it's all animals, right? So we're still struggling to find the small creators who are willing to actually not just do the currently acceptable amount of representation, but go further to not the status quo of representation.
Absolutely. Do you want to add to that?
Well, I do think it's interesting, kind of on that same note, it was like the first Black Super Smash Brothers character showed up this past year, which is not, I wouldn't call that a cozy game, but it's like Animal Crossing's Villager Skin 6. So I mean, I think the interesting thing about representation is that it can find ways to ripple through into other spaces and create a sort of trend-setting effect for AAA, but it is in usually very subtle ways. And I think, or I hope that cozy games can set more of that standard to be able to create, we should pay more attention to representation and ample representation in that.
Absolutely. So one thing I think was really interesting, and when I was first tossing this idea around with Leanne actually about the panel, I said if so because I didn't know if we would say yes or no to this, but if so, with cozy games, not quite being in the mainstream, but becoming more prominent and more discussed, let's discuss the need to sort of validate the fact that we play cozy games. I know growing up, especially before it was more cool to play cozy, I remember I loved Harvest Moon 64. I lived in that game, but I never really talked about it, or when I did, I'd always be like, I play some Harvest Moon, but I actually play Pokemon or something that was cool. And so did you ever feel the need to sort of validate your affection for these games, and do you feel like you still need to do that now, or do you just scream it out?
Oh my gosh, as a kid, my whole thing was, I was unapologetically in love with Nintendogs, but that was easy for me. But also, if I ran into gamer guys, I'd be like, but GTA is so cool. I go and I run over people, and it's really cool. And honestly, that game is really fun. And there's when you take the car and you can just follow traffic laws when you're driving. Yes.
I love that there was applause for following that is my favorite kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's Cozy Games 2002. Yeah. But yeah, I think nowadays, for me, I cannot build my personality around liking pink and being pastel and wearing cat ears, so it's really pretty easy for me, but I do think there's a lot of identity issues with more things like, as I mentioned before, studio heads and actually making the game. I find a lot of big studio heads that kind of favor masculine games. They'll applaud and support tiny devs making cozy games, but they won't actually push for them to be in the mainstream space. So I do think I've tried before to show there's a statistical reason, there's a statistical justification for how cozy games are about to blow up really big. We can already see that people are chomping at the bit for them, and they're going to. It's going to be that situation where the people who were making Fortnite when that concept was getting pushed out were like, wow, we're already making it, so that's cool. And I think there's going to be a lot of cozy makers who are really lucky that they're making it right now. But it just sucks that they won't believe that it's going to be good until it actually makes $1 million. Even with Stardew Valley making $1 million. I saw in the articles so much, it's like, oh, it's really interesting that they did that. I guess that's a fluke. I guess it's just a fluke, and I guess the next 8 will also just be flukes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many of you guys have done the same thing, but I feel like when I'm introducing myself in like a game-related community to new people, and they're like, oh, so what do you play? I'm always like, what can I think of that they might think is legitimate? And like, realistically, the top ones on my list are just going to be Stardew Valley, The Sims, Fire Emblem, maybe World of Warcraft if I'm feeling brave. But like, I'm immediately going to try and think of the ones that I think they would consider like real games, which is just whatever, I can't swear. But yeah, exactly. So I feel like I've always kind of had to justify myself to be in like gaming community spaces and to try and like pick out like the specific games that I think they will think are valid, rather than just what I actually enjoy playing and the things that reflect me as a player of video games. So yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, being like a cishet black dude, to come in and be like, there's this new Powerpuff Girls game coming out and I'm really excited about it. You know, for I think a pretty long while, it was this really kind of difficult situation to like try and justify, to justify to my friends that like this is the aesthetic that I'm into. I think that I'm kind of lucky now that because of the site I run and the community that I've created and friends that I have who also have similar similar aesthetic tastes, I feel less like I have to make those justifications. But yeah, I think for a pretty long time it was not fun.
Mm-hmm. Now we can all tell each other and tell our friends about cozy games. We should do it. So really quickly, another recommendation is Eastshade. If you are into just exploring beautiful worlds and painting, this is the game for you. There is no combat. You just explore a beautiful countryside and capture images for folks who would like paintings. It's really nice. And it's by Eastshade Studios, and they're lovely people. So what I love, and I think Kels was mentioning this a little bit in terms of like representation in cozy and wholesome games. And I wanted to talk a little bit about like representation and accessibility, because I think, again, for some of the reasons you might have already touched on, cozy and wholesome games seem to lend themselves to this part of gaming and to these like sort of subgroups of gaming or parts of gaming that like we don't see in the AAA spaces, and I wanted to sort of talk about how and why you think it lends itself to that a bit more.
Yeah, I think a lot of the reason Celeste comes off as a cozy game is because even though it's so difficult, it has like a myriad of accessibility options. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things where a challenge, it doesn't have to be the same sort of challenge for everyone. It's if you have trouble clicking, there are a lot of people who have trouble clicking the button really, really fast. Mm-hmm. For them, it doesn't become a challenge anymore, it becomes a block. It becomes a complete just wall. And that's not fun. That's not a challenge that you work to overcome. That's just a block. So accessibility is a huge thing, even if you're making a cozy, challenging game. And I think Nintendo does it pretty well because they're focused on children. They focus on how small someone's hand's going to be. Can they not do certain things? Like Pokemon has a lot of, even making the curry, there's a lot of things where it doesn't require you to do things that most people, there are a lot of people that have issues with doing. Making Calico, that's a huge, huge thing for us because specifically we don't want punishment, we don't want obstructive challenge. So a huge part of that is being like, what would obstruct someone? Even easy things like color blindness. Do they have to tell between the colors red and green? Because that's just going to be annoying for a lot of people.
I feel like you kind of covered everything I was thinking I could put in that. Yes, possible.
Yeah, I'd roll back a little bit to the indie space as well. The idea that I think that when you come from a marginalized background, you're more likely to take into account different facets, whatever they may be, that are perhaps unique to your community and not covered in the majority space. Mm-hmm. And then having that sensitivity also makes you think, well, what could other people be going through as well? And I think that there is a big tie to that. And also, like, if you're dealing with stressful situations on a regular basis, it may be a little less likely that you want to spend all of your time creating a game situation in which you're also delving into those stressful situations. So I think there is sort of a connection between those two.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of possibility for wholesome games that delve into triggers and things where you could express yourself to the world and really tell people your story. But yeah, it's really difficult to do that. I think people really underappreciate how difficult it is to tell a traumatic story through any piece of art, and how much of that yourself you put into that, especially in gaming where you get so much feedback on your art. That can be really difficult too.
Yeah, I think it's one thing that I've noticed particularly for me, like timing and pacing of games, especially like cozy games and indie games, they move so much slower, I feel like, overall. And I know for me that, because when I play games, I just sometimes I take a long time to process what's happening. And so having games that move at a slower pace or allow me to customize it to move at a slower pace allows me to feel safe. Again, it's the idea of safety within a game and feeling comfortable, versus games that are like, get faster, get out. They kind of just like push you aside. And so it's been really nice to find games that do that.
And actually, funny enough, on the opposite side of that, a lot of my game design tries to accommodate for ADHD because I have really bad ADHD. And a big part of it is like sometimes I start games and they're too slow and I can't ramp it up, and then I lose focus on it. Or it has the demo is too specific and there aren't parts that I can skip, or things like that can just really, really mess you up right in the first 5 minutes of the game.
That's true. So, really quick game break. Coffee Talk by Tokyo Productions. This is a lovely visual novel essay where you also can make lattes and latte art. And if you're interested, they're having a latte art contest right now. So if you go into the game and in the demo, you can make latte art, and if it's impressive, maybe get a key, I think. But yeah, this is a lovely story in like future Seattle, I think is where it's based. So late night cafe, lo-fi vibes. So, and I think I meant to, no, this is sort of like going into history as well as how do you stumble into. So how did you stumble across Wholesome games like as a kid? And then how do you continue to find Wholesome games now as an adult? Because I think accessibility or finding games was something that Josh mentioned earlier as well.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I like Powerpuff Girls as a kid, so like I mean, like anything kind of connected to that. I also think that there were, having like a younger sister and seeing some of her aesthetics and things that she was interested in. Gosh, there was this Super Nintendo game, Kokoma Night in Busyland, and I hate the game. But my sister loved it, and so we would play it a lot together on the Super Nintendo. And just being kind of like more sensitive to, well, what are games that like fit outside of what I would typically enjoy, but perhaps like my sister would enjoy, or my mom and my dad would like want to actually watch me play. I think kind of created a bit of a sensitivity for some different aesthetics.
Yeah, I think for me it was kind of a search for escapism. I lived in the middle of nowhere growing up, and I know I said I want to go live in the woods now. I didn't when I was like 8. That was a horrible thing. I was very, very bored all of the time, but I did have a laptop, and I did have a very, very kind, loving grandma who bought me my first copy of The Sims. So me and my laptop would literally hide in the bottom of my closet because my parents were the whole like, go outside, do something real. And I'm like, no, thank you, video games. So I would literally hide in the bottom of my closet with my laptop playing The Sims, and they would think that I was out like climbing trees or something, I don't know. And that was like very much my whole childhood with games, and that developed into like SimCity and basically every Sims expansion pack. And then as an adult, that actually developed into working on The Sims for a little while, and yeah, just continuing to always look for those kinds of games that just pull me out of whatever is going on in the world and let me do something else for a little while that isn't that.
Yeah, my dad started me on gaming really young. Like, I think I was on his lap playing Legend of Zelda when I was 2 or something. So I was always a Nintendo kid. So that leads into Nintendo and Cooking Mama and Animal Crossing and really all the good AAA cozy options. I also, then there was a brief departure into finally getting my first Xbox 360, but it was the second version that has the touch button.
Oh,
And that was, sorry, little side step, that was the coolest thing I'd ever seen in my entire life. Groundbreaking. Then I was playing things like Assassin's Creed and GTA and some other games like that. And I did that in college too. And then I played Journey. And Journey was my first tattoo.
So cool.
Actually, I would say walking sims were my first like indie Journey was pretty mainstream. It came out on consoles, and that was like really eye-opening for me. And that was the idea of like, not only I wanted to become a game dev already, but like, wow, I could like make games that I really, really deeply connect to. And I cried at the end of Journey, like, because when it first came out, you got paired with people the whole time, and like you helped. So it was the coolest, most wholesome experience I think of my whole life. And that really kickstarted like, oh, you can play games that aren't just hitting people, which I still liked, but it was really cool.
Yeah, for sure. I think my brother and I grew up playing games together, and so we did a lot of the Super Nintendo. We were a Nintendo house as well, and I think that definitely influenced my love for wholesome games. And then I went through a phase where I stopped playing games in college. I just was like, I'm too old for games. Wrong. And then after college, I played To the Moon actually, and that wrecked me, but in the most bittersweet, beautiful way. And then I started playing, and actually Journey was the next one that I played as well. So that brought me back into the fold, and I'm here to stay. Excuse me, really quick favorite rec. It's called The Frog's Tale, and it is flippin' cute. And it's by A.J. Norman, and it's about a little frog going on an adventure. And if I remember correctly, A.J. is creating this, I think, as a dedication to his father. So I think that's also really, really sweet.
The frog is adorable.
It's some of the cutest pixel
I would
art.
like to be their friend, please.
Yes, it's so cute. The toadstools, the facial expressions, it's perfection. So, moving on into sort of how cozy games have influenced the work that you're currently doing. I won't even say more. I'll just let you say that.
I feel like you should start.
I guess I mentioned a couple things so far. It's entirely our base for our game, so it really does impact a lot. Finding it, I feel like it creates such an incredible community. My work in AAA before was community management. So I worked for a lot of games with their communities, and they've still had really wholesome, wonderful communities, because I grew up in online communities, and as long as you have a good curator, you can figure it out. But having cozy games as the games that we're making, I find it's even more than just the self-expression of wanting a cozy game. It brings people to you that are just so incredibly wholesome and wonderful. Yeah. And our Discord is just people sharing images of their pets together and talking about their days. It's really wonderful, and I think it didn't influence me to be more cozy, but I guess I used to have a lot of faith in internet communities for a while, and then I kind of dropped out a little bit over 2014 specifically, and I guess that really brought me back to like, oh no, that's right, the internet can be like really wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of brought me into working in games in the first place, right? So I used to be the global social media manager for The Sims for a while. And that was great fun, but like that is a role that I would never have found myself in if I hadn't literally grown up hiding in the closet playing those games a lot. So like for me, it very much dictated a path that I ended up on that I never expected, because before I was doing that, I was working in a bank training to be a financial advisor, which is like very different. So for me, like it just totally changed the direction that my life went in. And how I approach like everything.
Yeah, I think for me, cozy games have really, they've sort of influenced my own enjoyment and taste, but I've really been interested or impressed by the ways that it's influenced the communities that have been around me. So the IntelliGame community, I think, though we spend a lot of time talking about like politics and like, current events and having heavy discussions, we also spend a lot of time like playing Yonder and like streaming different cozy aesthetic games. And so the community that we've created is one that I think is a lot more considerate and a lot more and is more thoughtful than I think many people would expect a gaming community to be. And I think that's what's really intriguing about cozy games, is that they set a tone that encourages you to be gentle, and being able to create communities, I imagine, like the Calico Discord. It's just a great way to realize this is another great thing that games can do that a lot of people don't expect.
Perfectly stated. So really quick, another pixel art game that I really wanted to make sure to share. It's called Little Witch in the Woods. There's no release date, I believe. It's still just very much in development, but it's by 77 Games, and it just looks so cute. And you're a little bitch in the woods. I don't know that's kind of all I know about it. That's all. So yeah, it's another. I've been really into pixel art, probably because I'm helping work on Garden Story. But yeah, the pixel art and the animation is just lovely, and it looks like a really cozy games where you can craft spells and things. So we kind of already touched on this, so I'm going to skip it a little bit unless you have anything to add. In terms of cozy games influencing the industry, we kind of touched on it, but I don't know if you all wanted to add anything to that as we see.
I think the one thing I'd add is making people being able to actually make games for a different target means that that target is now going to grow up playing video games and get into the industry. And I do think that that influences the industry hugely. I think there's a lot of people that are now going to be attracted to it that I'm sure all of you have heard this before, but someone that comes up to you and says, oh, I don't play games. I can't play games. Sorry, I'm not really good at games.
Right.
And kind of blocking them off from an entire art medium. Like, you don't hear that, like, oh, I can't watch movies. I mean, you could say, like, I can't watch them, you can listen to them or something like that. Yeah, it's an entire art medium, and I think the only reason that some people think that they can't be in it is because there's one genre that they associate with it, and they just don't happen to be into that genre. So the more genre and targets of people that get included, the more they're able to make games that perpetuate even more.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we had a panel yesterday about why you should have like easy modes and accessibility options in games, and I think it kind of ties into that in that like the more you do it, the more it's going to be popular, and like the more it grows, the more games we can make, and the more people will come into it, and like literally everyone in that cycle benefits from that. So I think it is influencing it, and it's kind of like gaining momentum with that, and that cycle will continue.
I agree.
Beautiful. So another break here, we just had one. Alchemy Story, and this is I think an early access, and it's basically another sort of Harvest Moon, Stardew Valley. If you like farming, fishing, all of that good stuff, this is the game for you. But you are an alchemist, so you're crafting spells, making potions, petting animals. I don't think that's what alchemists do, but I'm sure they would. It seems like a sub-job description. So before we start like closing out for maybe more questions and game recommendations from you all, I want to just ask, like, why do we need cozy or wholesome games in this industry? Why is it so important that we are here?
Because the world is garbage. Listen, like we all play video games for different reasons, right? We have stress relief, escapism, all of that kind of stuff. And cozy, wholesome games will help relieve some of that fog that we all build up on a daily basis, right? And there are lots of different ways that people enjoy doing that. Reading, all those other different outlets, and we picked these as part of ours, which is great. For me, I feel like that's like the biggest reason. I feel like they replenish me. I feel like they just re-energize me a lot. They inspire me, and they make me feel a little less like yelly and angry at the end of the day, which is always good.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think we need a lot of different types of games because there's a lot of different times in your life. And for instance, I mean, even times in the day, sometimes I need something hard enough that it'll distract my brain, because sometimes ADHD could start running with really bad thoughts. And so I need something like Celeste or Stardew Valley or something really intense, Hollow Knight. Sometimes I need that and it'll distract me. And sometimes I need something that, I'm so sorry, my brain can't turn on right now. I can't focus on Hollow Knight. I can't get even through one little part of a dungeon, or part of the dungeon.
The map.
So I need something like Calico that's like, I'm just gonna sit here and I'm gonna play with some cats. I'm not gonna think about it. There's no like time thing of, if I don't feed my cats, they'll run away from me like in Nintendogs. I think it'll help everyone. I think everyone could use both types of games if they start to get into them.
Yeah, I guess I go back to, it's about saving the things we love, right? It's a Rose Tico moment, my heart. There's something about the ways that, when I think about even streaming cozy games, it's not even necessarily that we don't have heavy discussions, but it provides a space where I feel more comfortable opening up about what is going on. And I think that, at least for me, cozy and wholesome games provide a safe space to get in touch with something emotionally that can be very difficult in more conflict-centered situations. And so I think that, kind of speaking to that same idea of having a broad spectrum of games, cozy wholesome games provide this opportunity to dive deep into just the self. And I think that we need opportunities for recharge, for introspection, for connecting with others in ways that orient around like love or kindness or patience. And those are experiences that we haven't traditionally focused on in digital media. So I think that we need cozy, wholesome games so that we can take this, ever-growing multi-billion-dollar industry that everybody cares about because it makes money, and then say, well, you should care about it because it also can like recharge the soul.
Yeah, and what I find really interesting is we don't have the same conversation in movies, right? We don't say like, why would you need a Ghibli movie? It's like, you want Ghibli sometimes, and sometimes you want the Transformers movie, and both are valid options, but they're totally different feels.
Right, and it's important to have like access to those fields when you want them. And so making sure that these are getting made and that we talk about them and you know about them is really important. Yeah. So last game break for today, and then we'll get to their recommendations. This is a game called Songbird Symphony. So if you enjoy rhythm games in particular, this has an element of rhythm to it. And you are a little bird trying to find sort of your identity. And so you're exploring other bird lands. There's lots of really wonderfully bad puns. So if you enjoy that sort of thing, this is definitely the game for you. And yeah, it's really cute. It's by Joystick Studio. So I think I asked this already, but are there any specific places where today you go to find your favorite or your next favorite cozy or wholesome games?
This panel.
Yeah, I've learned like
This panel, Jenny's Twitter, most of Twitter, to be fair, because I have a very curated timeline right now that is just like garbage free. It's very nice. And it's also just like cute indie games everywhere. Yeah. Honestly, I just talk to people that I know also enjoy playing these games. They can be tricky to find, and it is pretty much always word of mouth because they're small teams. They don't have marketing budgets for that kind of thing. So talk about cozy games, tell people about cozy games. That's how they will get out there.
To plug a whole bunch of things. There's a Wholesome Games Twitter, which is also Discord, and they've been trying to curate and keep up with.
They do a great job. Yeah.
And we have some really great discussions on there about like basically all of this, as well as finding like a streamer that you really like that is into those things. There's also, to plug the booth I'm part of, the PAX Together booth really focuses on inclusivity, and inclusivity is wholesome, so a lot of those games end up to be wholesome. I think, luckily, a lot of cons are starting to realize that they want to show these types of games. We were in the Indie Mini booth for West last year. So hopefully these cons will also allow you to be introduced to those types of games.
Yeah, I think the only additional resource I talked about is itch.io. Itch.io is a game platform like Steam or GOG or Epic, where you can buy games, except like it's a really indie-focused space. But they also have like, I think, the best developer platform revenue split. So if you're interested in making sure your money goes to your developer, then itch.io is a great place to do it. And it also just, there are so many different kinds of games, aesthetics of all kinds, projects that range from really not super finished to like significantly polished. There are, people have been publishing tabletop role-playing games. They publish, what's the word I'm looking for? Magazines. They do zines, all sorts of stuff. It's just a phenomenal place to find all kinds of different work.
Yeah, I think the only other place that hasn't been mentioned is, and this is if you're really wanting to go sort of digging and treasure hunting, but I also try to follow certain game events. I think like Day of the Devs is one, The Mix is another, where these are events that carry indie games in particular, but oftentimes you'll find, because they're smaller side events that usually run tangent to events like PAX, they are ones that will also have a lot of more cozy and wholesome games included. And so even if you can't attend, they have websites where they announce all of the titles, and usually when they're announced, I kind of just go through the titles and look at all of them, and if any of them pique my interest, I'll just follow them and just keep an eye on them. So.
And actually, I'm surprised we haven't brought up at any point during this panel Untitled Goose Game. They won.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
They won the mix last year.
They did, yeah.
And they you can look around and see their little pins with the goose.
They're everywhere, and it's so good. And that is another, like mainstream game. Like it was in Time magazine, which is kind of awesome.
And that's another one where the industry went, okay, they made more money than any indie has been making recently in the past 5 years. It's probably a fluke. Nobody talked about it. Oh, a bunch of games like Untitled Goose Game are about to come out, like they do with other genres. They were just like, cool, this is good. Okay, I guess we'll just move on to the next.
Yeah, we need more goose games.
We need more goose games.
I know. So this is the time where if you would like to get ready to take notes, we've got recommendations from all three of our panelists, and they're going to be sharing some of their favorite games that are both currently out, so if you are interested you can play them now, as well as the ones that they're anticipating, so you can have something to look forward to as well. So I think Leanne.
Cool, that's me. Now to see if I can remember what these are from screenshots. The first one, okay, so we will start from the top row and just kind of go along. The first one is Parkitect. This is an amazing park building game. I really enjoy Coaster, I want to say it is. Yes, there we go. I'm just escaping the name, sorry. But I find it a little bit stressful because the pathing tools are really finicky, and building out a ride takes a lot of individual work. You have to build out all of the theming and stuff, and there's no just kind of drop a thing in and it's done, yeah. If you want to build a coaster from scratch, just say goodbye to 4 hours. And you don't always need that. So for me, Parkitect is a step down from that and more towards the classic kind of theme park roller coaster tycoon kind of stuff. It has a great community workshop of lots of pre-built stuff and themed out stuff. There's still a lot of customization to it, and obviously it's not a huge team, so they don't have a giant budget, and the art is more of a low poly kind of style. But it's really cute, and it fits great, and it's really fun to play. And they just released their first expansion, which involves one land that is just entirely pink and donut themed, and I love it. The next one up is Pokemon Go. Do I need to say anything else? It's Pokemon Go. Come on, we know this. And next to that is Banished, which is a city building kind of thing, but it starts in medievally kind of times, and it's just a really chill you put down a couple of houses, some people plow some fields, and maybe have some goats. You just kind of let that play out for a while. It's really good. You can hit one specific point where it gets a little bit stressful, where your first batch of people are elders, and they all start dying off. And then everyone else is still a child. And they're okay, but who's gonna go pick the apples? I really need agents. But if you manage to balance that, you're fine. It's really fun. And the upcoming ones, I'm sure you're all familiar with Mini Winnie's Night Market and Ooblets, right? Yes? No? Oh.
All of them are amazing.
Winnie's Night Market, I think everyone has that on their slide, so I might leave that one for someone else to be able to talk about. Ooblets is... How do we even describe it?
It's plants with dance.
It's
battles.
Pokemon dance
Dance battles, yeah.
and Gardening.
Lots of dress up.
Yeah. I hesitate to compare it too hard to Pokemon because I think that sets a little bit of a different expectation because I think the plants are more like your friends than tiny slaves in balls. But and there's no like combat or anything to it either. They do like dance battles like you already mentioned. And To the Rescue, a dog shelter simulator is probably fairly self-explanatory. When Jenny asked for examples, I had just seen the software, so I don't know a ton about it yet. But it looks really, really cute, and I would like to run a dog shelter, please.
And they have a booth here. If you go
Yes.
to the back over there, you'll see it because it's adorable. Their home booth is adorable.
And they had just a really successful, they just finished a really successful Kickstarter run.
Yep.
So it's really exciting. Yeah. Oh, Kels.
Yeah. A Short Hike is adorable, and it's a wonderful short game for if you just want to have like an experience. You're this little, either like a little bird person, and you're chilling at this cabin, and you have nothing to do, and you need cell reception, so you have to go to the top of this mountain to get cell reception.
Kids these days.
Well, it's wholesome. You try to call your mom. It's actually thinking about when you call your mom makes me tear up a little bit. But it's just a very, very sweet game. The art style is really adorable, and it has this wonderful accessibility option too. If you're having visual problems with the pixelization, you can turn that down or up. But it really, I absolutely loved every second that I played of it. It's about like 3 hours. You can make it longer if you just keep going. And it's just a really satisfying little game. And then Abzu, which is from one of the designers from Journey. It's actually really interesting in a way of if you wanted to go to an aquarium, because it's very knowledgeable. You can sit in certain areas and just the camera will zoom into fish and tell you their names and scientific names. It's really cute. Abzu, it's ABZU. And yeah, that's just a really nice game where you swim, you're like a diver, and you swim through areas, and it's just really pleasing. And then I just have Animal Crossing on there because I thought it was really obligatory. If you don't play Animal Crossing or you haven't played it yet, it is a community sim, the only marketed community sim, which is really awkward for Calico because Calico's a community sim, it's not a farming sim, you don't make a farm. And we try to say like Animal Crossing, it's a community sim, only one of the genre. And it's really great because it's very low challenge. You don't have to really strategically plan a farm or anything. You just go around to make friends. My only criticism is because it has those mainstream elements of challenge. Sometimes if you leave for a while, when you come back, everyone will yell at you. Every single person in the village will yell at you. So don't
leave them.
Maybe that will happen.
Yeah.
We'll see.
But it is our biggest comparison to my game Calico because it's more of a dollhouse than a sandbox, because you really are just building this little world for yourself. Games that are coming out, I also have Miniko's Night Market. It's this really, really cute 2D, but really, really hand-drawn artistic style where you collect a bunch of calves. And really, don't we all just want to do that? And you're at a night market and it has this really beautiful aesthetics. And then Skatebird.
So good.
So they had a successful Kickstarter recently, and it's a skateboarding Tony Hawk game, but with birds. Just imagine those little kickflip skateboards with a bird on it. That's the game.
Everything is to scale in the environment. So
Yeah.
It's like pencils and stuff.
So Skatebird is doing wonderfully. What was the last one?
Ooblets.
Oh, okay, that is Ooblets. And then Ooblets, Ooblets is a really, really interesting game right now because it's kind of on the forefront of cozy games. It's the biggest one, the most anticipated cozy game coming out. So we're all waiting. We're all waiting to see how it does, and it'll kind of set a big precedent. which is a lot of pressure on the devs, and I'm sorry for that.
OOBLETS.
OOBLETS.
Which is a very
I think
fun
we'll
one to
probably
say.
will do like Twitter threads about these as well afterwards if you're like frantically trying to keep up. Yeah.
And then Josh.
Yeah, I'm gonna try and do like one sentence summaries of each
Yes.
of these. Yonder is Skyrim with no fighting but beautiful. Kind words, lo-fi, chill beats to write to is sending really important, kind-hearted messages to strangers. Quench is the third one, so we're going from the top left to right. Quench is guiding a herd of elephants to find water and to learn about sort of lineage and heritage. Tunic is very, very cute, lovable Zelda-ish. Welcome to Elk is really heavy, but a reminder that broken people are still people with souls and lives. And though I feel like after our discussion, I feel like maybe this factors more into wholesome than cozy. Get in the Car Loser is
Such a wholesome game.
it's got Final Fantasy 13 style road trip with disaster people trying to find each other and themselves. It's great.
And if you're interested in Tunic, I believe that is showing here at the Finchie booth as well.
Yeah.
So you can also play
They also have shirts and pins with the cute little fox too.
Showing at the Finchie booth. So if you go to Finchie, they've also just all really great games, but Tunic is there as well. So we do have about 6 minutes for questions. Yes. So if you're interested, please take pictures, follow everyone. Everyone does really great work in the game space. So and Calico is here, so you can go play Calico. And Garden Story is here, so you can come play Garden Story and say hi. And if you have any questions, please feel free to come to the mic. But that is it for the main portion of the panel. Yay! We'll start with you.
So I've played a lot of different games, Apex Legends, Screen Command or something more like a focus violence to it, but I also very much enjoy Animal Crossing. I'd like to get into Stardew Valley. I just watched a lot of videos.
Could you scoot a little closer to the mic?
Okay.
Sorry, I'm just having trouble. It's fine. Yeah. Thank you.
That I play this different variety of games, and I've got between these two different communities. One of them are like playing Apex. Why are you playing Animal Crossing? One of them is Animal Crossing. Why are you playing Apex? I just can't seem to, get these two communities together. Is there something that you guys have noticed, or is there a trend that keeps these two people apart? I think there'd be a lot of crossover that we enjoy.
I mean, I think a lot of that comes down to the stigma of wholesome games, right? And people not viewing them as legitimate games or whatever. I think it was great that you sit in both spaces and enjoy both. I wish that maybe people were making me feel like this, because that sucks. To be honest, I'd just be like, why are you not playing these? I don't know if maybe they've never been encouraged to play stuff like that, and they've always stuck to the Apex Legends and things like that. Maybe that's something that you want to try and just be like, hey, why don't you give it a go? It's fun.
And on the other end of, I feel like a lot of wholesome games communities can be really scared of mainstream communities because there is a fairly accurate stereotype of the kinds of feels of those communities, but they aren't always accurate. So I think a big thing is bringing those people together as people and being like, let's just hang out, let's talk about something completely different and get to know each other, and then, especially with the wholesome community, with the Apex community, then they'll be like, oh, okay, I feel safer here, and I can exist here, and maybe they'll get into Apex too, because as I said, I feel like there are space in your life for both types of games. And Apex is pretty cool because it does actually have representation, pretty good representation in that. So I feel like they could fit in there. Yeah, it's just about having both sets of people feel safe because feel like they're going to be attacked. So it's just kind of alleviating that.
I know League of Legends kind of scared me away from your community, so.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
My question is about, do you see a trend in the Cozy Wholesome game community and the accessibility games? So games that incorporate, like I understand people are colorblind, so here's some colorblind settings. I believe, Kels, you talked about how some games, kind of like quell your ADHD, things like that. Do you see a correlation? Because I feel like a lot of mainstream heavy hitter games, AAA titles, tend to kind of just almost alienate people with those kind of issues. And I feel like personally myself, I see a trend in people who take that kind of stuff into consideration more in the indie cozy community.
Yeah.
I think all three of us are like.
Yeah, I think that there is a dominant trend in indie space trying to advocate for that, but I do also think that there are a number of AAA studios that are trying to sort of learn from that model. Even the new Halo, and I think Microsoft as a studio is trying to focus on trying to increase accessibility. The new Microsoft Accessibility Controller is groundbreaking and was worked on with folks with Cable Gamers, which is a phenomenal nonprofit. I do think that there's a connection there, but I do think that indies are getting way deep into there and setting the tone for the rest of the industry.
Yeah, I think a big thing that a big hill that AAA games has to get over is the identity crisis of challenging games with accessibility, and understanding, as I mentioned before, that as long as it's challenging for the person playing it, it's still challenging. It doesn't have to be an objective hardness. A lot of people are very competitive in difficult games, and having it be like, I remember when we played Guitar Hero and Rock Band growing up, there wasn't any problem with one of us being able to play easy mode. It was still incredibly cool for one person to be able to play the hardest song on expert mode. Yeah. But because my hands were little baby hands and still are, I can't hit all the buttons correctly. I can't, literally can't do it. And nobody frowns on anyone one person in the band being able to play easy mode, and I think having that kind of, I don't know why that didn't spill over, but having that conversation in games where you can have the expert mode, you can have something that is objectively difficult that you can measure your challenge by, but and that doesn't affect the identity of the game as a challenging game to have accessibility and those easier options.
Yeah, I do think that, just to kind of mirror what Josh was saying, AAA studios are definitely following the trend of indies kind of leading this grassroots effort of seeing this representation and putting it into their games and accessibility. But I think the benefit that all of these AAA studios have is they have the funding to be able to implement a lot of it, whereas a lot of indies maybe want to do more as well, but maybe don't have the funding available for that development.
Right.
Yeah, I think we have time for one more question, but afterwards we'll be able to step outside and also talk with y'all.
Sure.
But one more question.
Many Wholesome games rely heavily on emergent gameplay supported by systems exploration and space exploration, but it seems the only way for the Kaza games to affirm their status is to limit the connection between input level, progression level of gameplay, and wall off the narrative level from player agency. Is it even possible to design a Kaza game or have a game where Kaza dynamics exist in their accessibility space with those connections preserved to create a continuous feedback between the player's input level and the narrative level of gameplay? Thank you.
So,
That is a big question.
I think a lot of that is agency. A lot of that is agency, and I think agency is a big part of Wholesome. We're talking to a much smaller scale, not a Galaxy game, but in Calico, one big question is how we're doing relationships, because there should be agency in relationships. There should be agency in relationships, but in a game, you have to gamify something, and also to have a cozy game, allowing people to do everything in the game is important. So you have this level of how do you give the player enough agency that they really feel like they're impacting the game, that they connect with it, and also not having yeah, it's a really difficult question, and it's definitely so specific to games. But I feel like there are a lot of things in cozy games specifically with agency, because cozy games can focus on trying not to be problematic, and there's a lot of problems between agency, how games work, and consent. Yeah, and yeah, that's a big question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, as I said, we'll be outside if you have any additional questions, because I know there are a few more. And I'll definitely be posting up this as a thread, so that if you didn't catch pictures of the slide or you didn't get a game, you can find that as well. So thank you so much. I hope you all have a great final day of PAX.